The London Chess Classic is back on the calendar, and Gukesh is back at the board for the first time since the FIDE Grand Swiss. Today, we're going to be looking at a game of his against Mateusz Bartel, in which Gukesh dismantled Bartel's French defense with simple and logical moves. Gukesh opened with e4, and we got a very typical position of the French defense. Now here black plays a bit of a rare move with bishop e7. The main line is to play knight c6, and after bishop e3, play for a6 and b5. And these lines are very sharp, with black looking for play on the queen side, and white looking to generate some sort of king side attack. Because I get that he might want to put his knight on a4 or c4, but it's also very slow, and it's blocking his own queen side play with b5. Gukesh senses an opportunity and plays the move bishop takes c5, giving up his dark squared bishop. But his idea is that after bishop takes c5, bishop d3, he's seizing the initiative on the king side. And now white has a serious threat. For instance, if black plays a move like bishop d7, now white can win immediately with the move bishop takes h7. And after king takes h7, knight g5. For instance, if black plays the move king g8, then white can continue with the move queen d3, threatening checkmate on h7. And after g6, white plays the move queen h3, followed by queen h7 and taking on f7 with checkmate. And if black plays the move king g6, then after queen d3, he's in a lot of trouble. As after f5, white can simply play the move queen g3, threatening the move knight takes e6 with a crushing initiative. So, black's best option is to play the move f5. But now Gukesh takes en passant, and after an important move, knight e2, protecting the f4 pawn and stepping out of bishop b4 ideas, now white is ready to use these squares on d4 and e5 as potential outposts. In addition to that, the pawn on e6 can become weak, as it's a backward pawn, and can easily be attacked when white plays a knight to d4. Black plays bishop d7. He's trying to activate his bad bishop, but in doing so, he loses another defender of the pawn on e6. So white plays king b1, and black continues his regrouping, bringing the bishop to g6. White hits the pawn on e6, and after bishop g6, he hits the pawn again. Black must defend it with rook a e8. And now Gukesh plays bishop takes g6, forcing black to make a decision. In the game, black played the move h takes g6, and his idea is to keep control over the e5 square, hoping to play a move like e5. If queen takes g6, white can continue as in the game, and black will have no counterplay. So after h takes g6, Gukesh now finds a very strong move. He now plays the move b3. This is a very typical way to restrict a knight on b6. You're taking away the square of c4 and a4 and making sure that this knight will not come back into the game without serious loss of time. For instance, if black plays knight d7, this runs straight into a very typical tactic of a knight takes e6. And after rook takes e6, we can now play queen takes d5, and we'll soon exploit this pin with the move knight g5, which will win material. So black plays the move e5. He's at least trying to open some lines for his pieces and get rid of this backward pawn. But now the pawn on d5 becomes weak. F takes e5, bishop takes e5, and now Gukesh swaps off all of black's active pieces. Now rook e1 chasing the queen back, and now Gukesh continues his plan of exploiting this badly placed knight on b6, which is incidentally the only defender of the pawn on d5. He now plays the move a4. Black decides it's time to reroute the knight, and he might be dreaming of getting the knight to e4. Spoiler alert, the knight never gets there. With the move knight d7, black has now weakened his pawn on d5. And Gukesh, being a very strong grandmaster, is very alert to these things. A very tempting move could be knight e6. She's hitting both the rook and the pawn on d5. But this would be completely wrong, as after rook e8, queen takes d5. Now black plays a very strong move, queen f7. And now it turns out that white is pinned all over the place. Instead, Gukesh finds a more efficient way to exploit the weakness on d5. He now plays the move knight b5, hitting both the pawn on a7 and the pawn on d5. A double attack, and black can't protect both. For instance, if a6, there's queen takes d5 and it's a check. So black decides that the lesser evil is to play a move like queen c6, defending the pawn on d5. Gukesh munches on a7, and after queen c5, the knight comes back. It's just a free pawn. Black now plays the move rook c8, yet another mistake. And again, Gukesh is very alert to the placement of black's pieces, as he now plays the move b4, attacking the black queen. And it turns out that the black queen has no good squares to retreat to. For instance, if black tries to defend this pawn with a move like queen c4, well, after knight d6, he might regret his decision. And if black plays queen c6, then he similarly loses an exchange. So in the game, black plays the move queen f8. But now the pawn on d5 hangs with check. That being said, after king h7, white still has to be a bit careful. For instance, if we were to take the knight on d7, this would be a terrible way to lose, as after queen takes b4 check, black's either going to pick up the rook on e1 with check, or in case of king a2, well, that's just made on the spot. But Gukesh finds an elegant move, defending the pawn on b4 and bringing another piece into the attack. He plays the move rook e4, preparing to swing the rook to h4. Black checks on f1 and the king slides up to b2. Knight f6, now white gives a check, and black blocks on h5. It's quite clear that black has no compensation for these two pawns. That being said, white king is still slightly airy, and in practice, there are always some practical chances. And that's why I really like the way Gukesh plays in this position. Because even though his moves weren't objectively the best, but they were very much the safest moves. When your position is winning, it makes a lot of sense to choose the safest continuations. And that's exactly what Gukesh is doing, with the move queen d3. He's offering a trade of queens, as he knows that in this endgame, it'll be a very easy win with these two extra pawns. So black can't exchange the queens, and he gives a check on f6, and Gukesh simply blocks. Black plays king h8, stepping out of the threat of rook takes h5, and now Gukesh realizes that one of his pieces is not in play. The knight on b5 was instrumental in picking up all of black's weaknesses. However, now that those weaknesses have been eliminated, the knight isn't actually performing that good of a job on b5. So Gukesh brings the knight back into action. He plays knight d6, attacking the rook on c8. If rook d8, that would run into a very typical tactic with knight f7. So black plays rook f8. And now the knight comes back into the center, covering all of the important squares, most notably the square on f2, where black would love to check with a queen or his rook. Black now plays queen e7. And again, Gukesh offers the trade of queens. Now black can play a move like rook f2, but of course white's not going to take the rook. He simply plays king a3. And with the rook and the queen both hanging, black now cannot avoid the exchange of queens. So after queen d6, black declines the exchange of queens, but now he loses even faster after g4. And the knight on h5 is now lost. An important point is of course that if you take on e4, The rook on f8 is hanging. So black tries rook f1. But now white takes a knight on h5. And after g5, simply rook g4. White's up a piece and 2 pawns, and black has no attack to show for it. So there was nothing else but to resign. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you'd like to see more positional masterpieces, click here.